Ghost in a White Dress. The autumn of 1994 turned out to be particularly cold in the small town of Meadow Creek, nestled among the green hills of Maine. The town, which once thrived thanks to the local paper mill, was now slowly dying after its closure in the 80s. Young people fled to big cities in search of a better life, leaving behind empty streets and memories that and why Uncle Michael had just returned to Meadow Creek after several years away. Big Boston hadn't lived up to his expectations, and although he would never admit it, returning home was a relief for him. Michael was only 26, but his eyes already held the weariness of someone who had seen enough disappointments. That evening, the one this story is about, Uncle Mike decided to visit the local club, the Blue Moon, perhaps the only place in Meadow Creek where life still pulsed. The old building of a former theater had been converted into a bar with a dance floor, where all the local youth gathered every Friday that it was late October. The rain had been pouring relentlessly for 2 days, turning the streets into muddy streams. A cold wind penetrated jackets and made even the hardiest shiver. But the atmosphere inside the Blue Moon was warm and welcoming. Michael met a few old friends there, had a couple of beers, and danced. For a moment, he even felt like he belonged to this place again. The clock showed almost 2 in the morning when he decided to head home. The rain hadn't stopped. On the contrary, it had intensified. Michael zipped up his jacket to his chin, pulled his hood over his head, and left the club. The streets were empty and dark, with only occasional streetlights reflecting in puddles as blurry spots. The sound of the rain drowned out all other noises, creating a feeling of complete isolation. Uncle walked quickly, trying to get to his parents' house, where he was temporarily staying, as soon as possible. His path led through the old park, once well-kept and beautiful, now neglected and gloomy. Michael had never been superstitious, but something about this park always made him uneasy that he had almost crossed the park when he suddenly felt a strange cold, not just the autumn chill, but an unusual, icy sensation that pierced him to the bone. And then he heard her. "Wait, please," a gentle female voice sounded behind him. Michael flinched and turned around. A few meters away stood a young girl in a white dress. She was barefoot, with long dark hair falling over her shoulders. Her silhouette was clearly visible in the darkness, as if she herself emitted a faint glow. "Can you help me?" she asked, taking a step forward. "I think I'm lost." Michael's first thought was to ask what the girl was doing in the park in the middle of the night in such terrible weather, but something stopped him. Maybe it was her pale face, which looked almost transparent in the flickering light of a distant streetlight. Or her eyes, large, dark, and unnaturally shiny. But what worried him most was that despite the heavy rain, her white dress and hair were completely dry. I need to go," Michael mumbled, feeling cold sweat break out on his back. "Please, don't go," her voice became almost pleading. "You're so handsome. I just want to get to know you." She took another step forward, and now Michael could clearly see that she was indeed emitting a faint silvery glow. Her bare feet left no tracks on the wet ground, and the raindrops seemed to pass right to her, untouched. The self-preservation instinct kicked in instantly. Michael turned and ran, without looking back. He wasn't convinced he had seen a ghost, but his body reacted as if he had encountered something supernatural and dangerous. Behind him, he heard her footsteps, light, almost weightless, but persistent. She wasn't falling behind. "I like you," she called out. "You have such kind eyes. We could have a good time together." Michael ran, stumbling, breathless more from fear than physical exertion. Finally, he burst out of the park onto a lit street and only then dared to look back. The girl was gone. Only rain and darkness behind him. Uncle reached home, trembling from the cold and the shock he had experienced. He didn't tell anyone about the encounter, fearing ridicule. But the next day, when he went to the local coffee shop, he overheard a conversation between 2 older men. "Jimmy Parker says he saw her last night near the old cemetery," one was saying. "The girl in white?" the other asked. "Again?" "Last month Ed Thompson swore she followed him all the way from the lake to his house." Michael approached them and, trying to speak calmly, asked what they were talking about. You've been away for a long time. Probably haven't heard about our local legend," replied the older man, introducing himself as Harry. "They say the ghost of a young girl in a white dress appears in the park and around the old cemetery. She haunts young guys, tries to seduce them. Some say they've seen her disappear right before their eyes. Others claim she walks through trees and walls. And how long has this been happening? Michael asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. For years, Harry answered. But she becomes especially active in the fall. They say she was buried alive in the fall. This was the first mention of the story that would later haunt my uncle. He began asking locals, especially the old-timers, about the girl in white. Gradually, he learned about the tragedy that occurred in Meadow Creek more than 30 years ago. In 1963, Lily Watson, Ann, and Foster were best friends. Both 16, they had been inseparable since childhood. Lily was a quiet and serious girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor, while Ann was lively and sociable, the center of attention at any party. Despite their different personalities, their friendship only grew stronger over the years that in the summer of 1963, a traveling fair came to Meadow Creek, an event that children and teenagers look forward to all year. Among the usual attractions and treats, a new tent appeared at the fair with a mysterious sign, Madame Eleonora, Secrets of the East. Madame Eleonora turned out to be an exotic middle-aged woman who claimed to come from an ancient line of Indian mystics. She offered visitors to try an elixir of clairvoyance, a drink that, according to her, could briefly open the third eye and allow a glimpse into the future. Most adults saw it as harmless entertainment, but the teenagers were thrilled. Anne, always ready for an adventure, persuaded Lily to try the mysterious potion. That evening, the girls paid $1 each and received small vials containing a dark blue liquid. Madame Eleonora instructed them to drink the contents before bed, lie down, and focus on the questions they wanted answers to. What exactly happened that night is not known for certain. All that is known is that the next morning, both girls were found unconscious in their beds. They did not respond to stimuli, had shallow breathing, and a barely perceptible pulse. Meadow Creek's doctor, Dr. Johnson, suspected the girls had been poisoned by some unknown substance. He recommended immediately taking them to the hospital in the nearby larger city of Portland for a detailed examination. But in those days, transportation was problematic. There was only one ambulance in town, which at that moment had already left for a call to a remote farm. Lily's parents, wealthy by Meadow Creek standards, arranged for private transport for their daughter. Anne, who lived only with her mother in modest circumstances, had to wait for the ambulance to return. The girls' condition worsened. By evening, their pulses were almost undetectable, and their breathing became so slow and shallow that it could barely be noticed. Dr. Johnson, opting for caution, declared both dead due to poisoning by an unknown toxic substance. Lily's body, as planned, was sent to Portland for an autopsy and examination to determine the exact cause of death. And, however, according to her mother's wishes and local traditions, was to be buried as soon as possible, and Foster's funeral took place 2 days after the tragedy. The whole town came to say goodbye to the young girl, whom everyone loved for her lively and bright personality, and was buried in a white dress she had made herself for the school prom, a prom she never got to attend. Meanwhile, in Portland, something happened that was later called a miracle. While preparing for the autopsy, a young pathologist's assistant noticed faint movements in Lily's chest. A more detailed examination confirmed the girl was alive, although in a deep coma. The doctors at Portland Hospital made every effort to save Lily. 3 days later, she regained consciousness, although she remained very weak. Tests showed the presence of a substance in her blood similar to ergot derivatives, a fungus that parasitizes rye and other grains. Such compounds could cause a state similar to lethargic sleep, with an extremely slow pulse and breathing, easily mistaken for death. When Lily had recovered enough to speak, she told about the elixir of clairvoyance that she and Anne had drunk that fateful night. The authorities immediately began searching for Madame Eleonora, but the fair had long since left Meadow Creek, and the mysterious woman could not be found. Only then did the terrible truth dawn on everyone. If Lily was alive, then Anne most likely was too. This meant the girl had been buried alive. Lily's father, an influential man in the county, insisted on the immediate exhumation of Anne's body. When the coffin was opened, those present froze in horror. The inner lining of the coffin was torn to shreds, scratch marks were visible on the lid, and Anne's fingers were worn down to the bone. Obviously, the girl had regained consciousness in the coffin and tried to get out. The tragedy shook not only Meadow Creek but the entire county. Anne's mother soon committed suicide, unable to live with the knowledge that her daughter had died such a horrific death. Dr. Johnson, now the former doctor of Meadow Creek, left town. Unable to bear the contempt and accusations from the townspeople, Lily Watson eventually recovered physically, but the psychological trauma stayed with her forever. After graduating from school, she left Meadow Creek and, according to rumors, settled somewhere on the West Coast, and the town gradually sank into oblivion, until the late 70s when rumors began to spread about the ghost of a young girl in a white dress appearing in the park in the old cemetery wherein Foster was buried. This story deeply affected my uncle. He couldn't shake the thought that the girl he met that rainy night was the ghost of Ann Foster. Was she seeking revenge? Or just trying to find someone who could ease her suffering? Michael continued to ask locals about their encounters with the mysterious girl. It turned out that over the past decades, many young men had seen her, and all descriptions matched remarkably: a white dress, bare feet, dark hair, and pale skin that seemed to glow in the dark. She always appeared in rainy weather and always tried to attract the attention of young men. Uncle began dedicating more and more time to researching Ann Foster's story. He spent several days in the town library, studying old newspapers. In the archives, he found confirmation of the 1963 tragedy. There were newspaper clippings about the tragic death of the two girls, then enthusiastic articles about the miracle in Portland when Lily returned to life, and finally, shocking reports about the exhumation of Ann's body and the discovery that she had fought for her life in the coffin. One photograph particularly struck Michael. It showed Ann on the eve of the tragedy, during a school picnic. A smiling girl in a white dress with long dark hair. It was the same face he had seen in the park. After this discovery, Uncle became even more obsessed with Ann's story. He even visited the old cemetery, where he found her grave, a simple stone with the inscription, Ann Foster, 1947 to 1963, forever young. Michael brought flowers to her grave and stood there for a long time, as if waiting for some sign. Days passed, and Uncle began to notice strange things. Sometimes, returning home late at night, he saw a white shimmer among the trees in the park. At times, it seemed to him that someone was watching him from the window of the upper floor of the abandoned house opposite. And once, waking up in the middle of the night, he saw wet footprints of bare feet on the floor of his room, leading from the window to the bed and back. Friends began to worry about him. Michael lost weight, dark circles appeared under his eyes, and his gaze became restless. He went out less often during the day and wandered the streets more often at night, especially in rainy weather. According to my relatives, the most alarming thing was that Uncle began talking about Ann as if he knew her personally. He talked about her dreams, fears, about how she felt in the last moments of her life. No one understood where he got this information, as everyone who really knew and had long since left Meadow Creek or died. She was so scared, he told his mother, my grandmother. She woke up in the dark, in a confined space, not understanding where she was or what was happening. Then she realized. Can you imagine her terror? Screaming is pointless, no one will hear. The air is running out. She tried to open the lid, scratched it with her nails until they broke and her fingers started bleeding. But it was all in vain. Michael's parents were seriously concerned about his mental state and insisted on consulting a psychiatrist, but he refused, claiming he was fine. The climax came at the end of November, almost a month after the first encounter with the ghost. It was a particularly cold night, and a severe thunderstorm raged over Meadow Creek. Uncle Michael, as usual lately, couldn't sleep. Around midnight, he left the house and headed towards the old cemetery. What happened there is known only from his own words, which he told me many years later when I was already a teenager. According to him, near Ann's grave, he saw her, the girl in the white dress, exactly the same as during their first meeting. She stood in the downpour, but her clothes and hair remained dry. You came back, she said, and genuine joy sounded in her voice. I knew you weren't like the others. You understand me. I know who you are, Michael replied. You're Ann Foster. You were buried alive in 1963. The girl smiled, a sad, melancholic smile. Yes, she nodded. I'm Ann. And I just want someone to listen to my story. You're the first one who didn't run away from me. Everyone else is afraid. She told him about her last hours in the coffin, about the horror, despair, and gradual realization of the inevitability of death. about how her consciousness, even after the death of her physical body, remained tied to this place because of the strong emotions she felt in her final moments. "I don't want to harm anyone," she said. "I just want someone to know what I went through, to remember. And maybe then I can find peace." According to my uncle, they talked until dawn and told him about her short life, about her friendship with Lily, about their dreams and plans that never came true. She asked about the modern world, about what had changed over the decades. When the first rays of sun touched the gravestones, she began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, "for listening, for not being afraid." And then she disappeared, dissolving into the morning mist. After that night, Uncle Michael changed. He no longer wandered the streets at night, became calmer and more balanced. He continued to visit Anne's grave, bring flowers, but no longer out of despair or obsession, but out of quiet respect. Interestingly, after Michael's conversation with Anne's ghost, reports of the girl in white appearing in Meadow Creek became significantly fewer. And after a few years, they stopped altogether. When I last spoke to my uncle about this story, he told me something that I will remember forever. "You know, sometimes ghosts aren't so much supernatural beings as unfinished stories looking for their ending, and needed someone to listen to her, to understand her pain and fear. Sometimes all restless souls need is a little compassion and understanding." He also shared his theory with me about why Anne's ghost attracted the attention of young men specifically. According to him, in the last moments of her life, dying in a cramped coffin deep underground, and probably thought about everything she would never experience: first love, dancing at the prom, the first kiss. Her spirit was tied to these unfulfilled dreams, and that's why she sought contact with young men who reminded her of lost opportunities. That I asked, this story true? Did Uncle Michael really talk to the ghost of a girl buried alive 30 years ago? Or was it all just a figment of his imagination, fueled by local legends and perhaps excessive stress? I cannot answer these questions with certainty. But I know that in small towns like Meadow Creek, things sometimes happen that are difficult to explain with logic or science. Places where the past is closely intertwined with the present, where old tragedies leave traces that are felt for decades. Uncle Michael continued to live in Meadow Creek, got married, had children. He became the owner of a small shop and was a respected member of the community. But every year, on the anniversary of Anne Foster's death, he came to her grave with a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers. As he said, that I often think about Anne and whether she finally found peace. Was she able to let go of the horror and despair that kept her tied to the world of the living for so many years? Did she finally overcome the gap between life and death that became so cruel and sudden for her? Perhaps the most important thing I took away from this story is the realization of how fragile the barrier is between the world of the living and the dead. And how sometimes the strongest emotions, fear, despair, incompleteness, can hold a soul on the edge between these worlds, preventing it from finding peace. And I also realized that sometimes the simplest things, listening, understanding, showing compassion, can be more powerful than any rituals or spells when it comes to helping those stuck between worlds. So if you ever find yourself in Meadow Creek on a rainy autumn night and see a young girl in a white dress walking barefoot in the downpour, don't rush to run away. Maybe all she needs is for someone to listen to her story. The final record. I have very little time left. Very little. My hands still obey. They tremble, but they obey. However, judging by how quickly those hideous stains are spreading over my skin, how it is yellowing and drying, I must write quickly. My fingers seem not to belong to me. They feel foreign, wooden. If you're reading this, it means my plan worked only partially. You have come here, to my abandoned apartment in Ridgewood Heights, and found this notebook, stained with something, on the kitchen table. Perhaps you were seeking shelter while fleeing from another district engulfed in Chicago's madness. Perhaps you were being pursued by one of those beasts, those shambling corpses, and you ran into the first unsecured apartment, the one whose door I deliberately left open. I'm not sure I fully understood what I was doing. Take whatever you wish, food from the kitchen, if it hasn't spoiled completely yet, the canned goods in the cupboard, clothing in the bedroom, dishes. I won't need them anymore. Soon I will be utterly indifferent to all earthly matters. I ask you just one thing, one single request. If you see me or poor Amanda not lying where we belong, on the kitchen floor, please do what I could not finish doing. Stop us. Amanda will hardly be able to get up, considering what I did to her head. God, forgive me. But me, I might still have a chance. I don't know how this damn thing works, but I do not want to become one of them. The little hammer lies beside me on the table. Please. Underscore 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 underscore. Everything started on Tuesday. An ordinary Tuesday, a gray and damp November in Chicago. I was on my way to work, heading to my factory, Stalltech, where I had been working for 11 years as a machine design engineer. I walked along my usual route on Main Street. The air was steeped with moisture and the smell of decaying leaves. I was thinking about a new project, about blueprints, about an upcoming presentation, ordinary work thoughts. And then I noticed him. He was moving toward me. Moving is the most precise term, because the word walking hardly applies to his shifty, jerky, almost mechanical gait. His legs seemed to give way at the knees. His body swayed from side to side, like a marionette whose half the strings had been cut. He wasn't a typical homeless man, those you'd find by metro stations or under bridges. Rather, he seemed to be one of those perpetual wanderers, drifters found in every big American city. Hitchhikers/beggars with huge backpacks and caps meant for tossing spare change on the way to Alaska or for a ticket to Portland. They play discordant guitars in the subway, sometimes sleep on benches in Millennium Park, smoke cheap cigarettes, and always look a little worn by life. They are usually between 20 and 35 years old. Often, they are accompanied by girls, usually young and tanned, with clear eyes and a hunger for adventure in their gaze. This boy looked to be about 25, judging by his clothes, a huge, filthy gray sweatshirt with a hood pulled tightly over his head, wide, worn-out jeans barely clinging to his hips, and a red Chicago Bulls baseball cap stubbornly jutting out from under the hood. He moved slowly and in an unnervingly unnatural way. A giant army backpack monster would sometimes hunch his stooped back under the weight of its load and then pull him backward, forcing him into strange compensatory movements. I slowed my pace a bit to look at him. There was something in his presence that evoked an inexplicable dread. When there were about 4 or 5 yards between us, he suddenly lifted his head. The hood slipped back slightly, and our gazes met. More precisely, his stare just fixed itself somewhere beyond me. In that very second, a cold, a primal, animalistic terror pierced me. I realized that the boy was dead. Not ill, not high, not completely drunk, dead. The first thing that caught my eye was his eyes. Dull, glassy, matte, as if covered with a thin film of dust. If you have ever seen your pet, a cat or dog, pass away, you've seen those dried, lackluster eyes, where the tear glands no longer moisten them. They did not focus, they stared into emptiness. Secondly, he looked far older than I had thought at first. His skin, where it was visible from under the hood and collar, on his cheeks, on his neck, was of a distinctly unnatural yellow. An unhealthy, corpse-like yellow. If you have ever been in a butcher's shop and seen a severed pig's head lying on the counter, you know that hue. On one cheek, a large purplish stain was darkening, resembling a bruise, but an irregular, smudged one. Thirdly, the purple, almost black lips. They were open in a vacuous manner, the lower one sagging, revealing an uneven row of yellow teeth. A thin string of dark, viscous saliva trickled from the corner of his mouth. When we finally crossed paths on that narrow sidewalk, I was overwhelmed by a wave of such unbearable stench that I almost choked. It was a repulsive mixture of musty, acrid sweat, cheap whiskey, urine, and, worst of all, rotting flesh. If you have ever left raw steak on a kitchen table in the sweltering July heat for days, well, you understand. The smell of death, decay, rotting. It was so palpable, it seemed as though one could physically touch it. Instinctively, I jerked away from him, nearly leaping onto the roadway amidst honking cars, and quickened my pace without looking back. My heart pounded wildly in my chest. After about 20 meters, I couldn't help but glance back cautiously over my shoulder. This traveler continued his bizarre journey down Main Street. I noticed that all the passers-by meeting him made a wide detour, avoiding him tenfold. On their faces, involuntary expressions of revulsion appeared. Some even pinched their noses. So, it wasn't only I who saw and felt it. It's very important. This was no figment of my imagination. Although I couldn't rationally explain what I had seen, I could not dismiss it. That day, by evening, I had almost forgotten about that strange boy. And what was there to dwell on? Several quick, comforting explanations flashed through my mind. Perhaps a junkie on some new foul substance. Maybe crocodile, whose flesh rots from the inside out. Or perhaps he was just suffering from advanced jaundice, some severe form of hepatitis C, hence the skin color. I did the right thing by recoiling. I couldn't afford to pick up some infection. And I forgot. At least I tried to forget until the end of the workday. An engineer's work demands concentration, and I immersed myself in my blueprints and calculations. I already mentioned that I work as a machine design engineer, didn't I? I think it's worth emphasizing once more. My hand still functions, and I can write, albeit not as fast or as legibly as I would wish. My fingers are turning to wood. In general, I'm no Stephen King to capture in writing the full spectrum of feelings and thoughts that have been churning inside me these last few days, but I'm far from the mindless drunk from the suburbs, for you to understand. I am a person with higher technical education, accustomed to thinking logically and analyzing facts. That is why it is so important for me to tell things as they are, without filters or embellishments, honestly. Perhaps this will help someone understand what happened. Or at the very least, preserve the memory of Michael Davis. So, here's the thing, I'm an engineer. I work at a plant called Stalltech, producing agricultural machinery and equipment. I'm paid decently, and, oddly enough, I enjoy my work. I must have been lucky. I don't often get to work in my university specialty for 11 straight years and be satisfied. By the way, my name is Michael Davis. You will find my documents, passport, driver's license, diploma, in the bottom drawer of the writing desk in the bedroom, should anyone need them. Though that's unlikely. I don't have a wife, nor children. I had a girlfriend, Kate. We were together for almost 5 years, even lived together here in this apartment. But she left 2 years ago. She said that I was too self-absorbed in my work, that I was emotionally unavailable. Perhaps she was right. After my mother's death, I really shut myself off. Since then, the only person truly close to me has been my younger sister, Amanda, a college student. Amanda, my little one. Forgive me. I carried you in my arms 22 years ago. I remember you as an infant. I changed your diapers when you were just a few months old, fed you bottles of formula when Mom worked the night shift at the hospital. I was practically a second father to you ever since our old man left us, slamming the door when you were 5 and I was 13. I taught you how to ride a bike, taught you with math, protected you from bullies at school. Now you lie here, on the floor of my kitchen, in a pool of your own blood, and it seems that from time to time the leg in your white sneaker twitches ever so slightly. Or is that just my hallucinations intensifying? To kill you a second time, if you were suddenly to get up. I couldn't. Never. It has to end sooner, while I still have some control over myself. So here's the deal. On that Tuesday morning I first saw what my brain refused to call by name, and I almost forgot about it by evening. The workday passed in its usual routine, meetings, blueprints, phone calls, disputes with suppliers. When I left the gate of the Stalltech plant, it was already dark. It gets dark early in November in Chicago. Around 4:30 in the evening the twilight sets in. I live not far from the factory in the Ridgewood Heights area, about a 20-minute walk, and I always walk home to clear my head after work. To shorten the path, I usually go through Fox Park, a once-old, slightly neglected park with rusty rides that have long ceased to function. At that time of year and hour, the park was almost always empty. I strolled leisurely down the central avenue, inhaling the cool, damp air carrying the scent of wet asphalt and smoke from someone's chimney. The park's lanterns delineated small, uneven islands along the avenue, illuminating isolated benches and bare tree trunks. Most benches were empty and damp with dew, except for one that stood approximately in the middle of the avenue, bathed in the circle of light from a lamp. Someone was sitting there. At first, I couldn't tell who it was, but as I approached closer, I realized it was a woman. I saw long dark hair and the gleam of a leather jacket. She sat, oddly hunched forward, with her hair partially obscuring her face. She didn't move. I slowed my pace. Her posture looked unnatural, pained. Perhaps she was feeling ill. Maybe having a heart attack. Or had simply overindulged in alcohol. One should help a person, at least ask if she is all right, perhaps call an ambulance or the police. I hesitated for a moment. Approaching a stranger in a dark park isn't the best idea, yet I couldn't pass by someone who might need help. I stopped a few steps away from the bench and cautiously addressed her in a calm, non-threatening voice. "Ma'am? Excuse me, are you all right? Are you feeling unwell? May I help you somehow?" She did not answer immediately. Then, very slowly, almost languidly, she began to lift her head. That moment replays in my mind again and again, like a worn-out snippet from a cheap horror film. The dark park alley, the bright circle of light from the lamp, the two of us in its glow like actors on a stage, and she, as if filmed in slow motion, lifting her head as a lock of dark hair gradually slid from her face. Even now, sitting here, waiting for the end, I, a 35-year-old man, recall that moment with an involuntary shudder and a chill down my spine. For the second time in one day, the waxen, lifeless mask of a corpse stared at me. Bulging, murky eyes of a swampy color, without pupils, without any expression. The skin of her face was pallid, with a bluish tint, and in places already covered by cadaverous lilac stains, most noticeably on her neck and under her eyes. The face appeared somewhat swollen, puffy. The bluish, thickened lips, like little dumplings, were slightly parted. For several interminably long seconds she slowly, with obvious effort, pried those terrible lips apart. What? Her voice emerged as if from a deep barrel. It was hoarse, low, and croaky, as if she had spoken for the first time after an age-long silence. There was nothing human in that sound. I didn't wait for more. That same animalistic terror that had seized me in the morning overwhelmed me again. I abruptly turned and almost broke into a run away from her, into the dark alley. My back instantly went cold and felt as hard as a board, my knees barely obeyed, and my legs turned to jelly. At first I walked quickly, trying to maintain my composure, but gradually I began running, merely sprinting. And then I heard some sound behind me, a rustling, then the clear click of high heels on the pavement. Click, click, click. I whirled around. She was standing by the bench, where I had left her, but now she was on her feet, swaying slightly, with her head lowered. After a moment's hesitation, I turned again and hurried away, much faster now. The clicking of heels resounded behind me again, this time faster, more rhythmically, catching up. Click, 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 click. Eventually, panic overcame me, and I dashed full speed ahead. I heard her running after me, her heavy breathing or perhaps raspy, and the loud staccato of heels echoed very close behind. The exit from the park wasn't at the end of the alley. It was about 100 more meters, then a right turn past the gloomy, rusted silhouettes of the defunct amusement rides, a derelict Ferris wheel, some swings, a shooting gallery. I raced toward these rides, gasping for breath, feeling a burning sensation in my throat. The deafening staccato of heels never fell behind. It sounded, it seemed, about 2 meters from me, inexorably drawing near. When I sensed that the gap between us had diminished critically, that she was about to catch me, I sharply veered left out of the alley and plunged into the dense shadows beneath a huge, rusty old Ferris wheel. The footsteps behind me instantly ceased. I pressed myself against the cold metal support of the wheel, trying to merge with the darkness, and turned around. There was no sign of her. The nearest lamppost was about 7 or 8 yards away, its bright light illuminating the paved path but leaving me hidden in dense, almost inky darkness. Dense double, I gasped for air. My lungs burned. I should have quit smoking and taken morning runs 10 years ago, but now it was too late for that kind of reflection. I stood, hands braced on my knees, spitting bitterly on the ground. Where had that woman gone? I tried not to think about it at that moment. The only thing that mattered was that she hadn't caught me. Finally, I felt slightly relieved and cautiously straightened up. The fear crept back, freezing my knees. I was almost certain that if I turned around now I'd see the ghastly figure right behind me, as in the worst B-grade horror film. At hand, I had nothing but the heavy keychain from my apartment and work. I gripped it tightly in my right fist, wedging one key between my fingers like an improvised brass knuckle, and spun around sharply. Of course, there was no one behind me. Only the dark silhouettes of the rusty rides against the night sky. I turned and scanned for an exit from the park. The old cast-iron gates were open. Beyond them lay Oak Street, lit by street lamps, along which cars drove sporadically. The glare from headlights occasionally illuminated the wet pavement. Civilization, safety. Nearly calming down, I quickly but cautiously made my way to the exit, staying within the shadows. About 5 meters from the gates, I suddenly stopped dead in my tracks. My heart sank somewhere in my feet. There she was, standing behind a large old tree to the left of the exit, partially hidden in shadow, yet her dark silhouette and her glossy, lacquered jacket were clearly visible in the light of a street lamp from Oak Street. She was waiting for me. For 10 seconds, perhaps longer, we stood, staring at each other across those few meters of darkness. More precisely, I was staring at her, trying to catch even the slightest movement, some sign of life or intent. It was impossible to trace her gaze. The head was slightly lowered, the face in shadow. In those endless seconds I managed to study her better. Judging by her clothes, she was definitely not a homeless person or a junkie. A fine black leather jacket, apparently a Michael Kors, high leather boots with heels, perhaps Steve Madden, and a short dark denim skirt. Her hair was thick, black with a reddish tint, reaching her shoulders. She looked about 25, maybe a bit older. She remained absolutely motionless, with her head bowed. For a moment it seemed as if she was looking at me from underneath her chin, but I wasn't sure. Was she really dead? But then, how had she run after me? We just stood there, motionless, like two duelists waiting for the first move from the other. I was convinced that she could have stood like that until morning, frozen in her eerie stillness, but I couldn't stay. I had to get home. Mustering all my will and muscles, I suddenly lunged toward the open gates, aiming slightly to her right, to be as far away from the tree behind which she had been hiding. She did not move until we were side by side. But in that moment, as I ran past her, she jerked with an inhuman swiftness and grabbed me by the left sleeve of my jacket. Her fingers were as cold as ice and surprisingly strong. I felt the disgusting touch of her skin even through the fabric. Without thinking, I twisted my body sharply, wrenching my sleeve free, and simultaneously kicked her hard in the stomach. The blow was strong. I felt my legs sink into something. She emitted a strange sound, like the hiss of air escaping from a punctured tire, flailed her arms wildly, and fell with a heavy thud into the bushes by the tree. I didn't wait to see if she would get up or check if she was all right. I simply ran out of the park onto the lit street and continued home without looking back. I ran all the way to my house without stopping, even though my lungs were already bursting with pain. I couldn't force myself to slow down. I felt as if she were still chasing me, as if the eerie tapping of her heels resounded somewhere behind me. Already in the building's entrance, as I climbed the stairs huffing to my second-floor apartment, I felt a sharp burning on my right hand. Slowing down near my door and fumbling with my trembling hands for the keys, I glanced at my hand in the dim light of the overhead bulb and winced. At the base of my thumb, there was a rather deep, bloody scratch about 3 centimeters long. The blood had already begun to dry. I began frantically recalling the last moments by the park gates. I realized, when she grabbed me by my jacket and I struggled and pushed her away, she probably scratched me with her long nails. A fiend. I entered my apartment with a heavy feeling of doom, as if I had just signed my own death warrant. Deep inside I knew what that girl in the park was, and that morning boy too, and what they might have wanted from me. Of course, it wasn't a full bite, as in zombie movies, but who knows how this contagion is transmitted. It's essentially a corpse poison, with which she was probably soaked through and through, like a sponge. Her nails, her saliva. After locking the doors behind me, I dashed into the bathroom. I washed my hands meticulously with antibacterial soap until it stung, then treated the wound with hydrogen peroxide. The scratch hissed and foamed violently. Then I generously applied iodine to the scratch, feeling it sting. It wasn't the chemical burn that frightened me now, something else did. I took a very hot shower, trying to wash off the grime and that eerie cold left by her touch. Then, just in case, I tossed all the clothes I'd worn that evening, along with my expensive North Face jacket, into the washing machine, set the temperature to maximum, and added a double dose of bleach. I poured myself a large glass of whiskey, drank it almost in one gulp, refilled, and sat in my favorite chair in the living room, trying to analyze the situation. As an engineer, I'm used to logic and facts. But what facts did I have? 2 encounters with people who looked and smelled like corpses and behaved extremely strangely. One of them attacked me and scratched me. You can imagine how incredibly hard it is to grasp and accept that you have encountered something utterly supernatural, something that transcends the ordinary world. I repeat, the very thought of a walking corpse roaming Chicago makes you feel uneasy, as if you were caught reading tabloid horror stories or watching silly films. Of course, if you're not 15 and a fan of the series, The Walking Dead. I'm 35 now, have a master's degree in engineering, and I've tried desperately, to think rationally. If that morning boy on Main Street could theoretically be a jaundiced junkie in his final stage, then how does one explain the situation with the woman in the park? Even if one could dismiss her dead-looking face as merely a trick of light and shadow in the dark park, although I saw it clearly, how do you explain her behavior? Why was she following me? Why was she waiting by the gates like a predator lying in ambush? A seemingly frail girl against a grown, fairly sturdy man. What was the logic? Robbery? Then why run after me and wait silently? No normal, rational thought occurred to me. Alcohol didn't help, it only muddied my mind. Now, 5 days later, as I recall that evening, I don't surprise myself anymore at my naivety and my desperate search for a logical explanation. Yes, I could hardly believe it, but who would have believed me in my place? Who would immediately acknowledge a werewolf in the massive dog that ran across the road at night? Or an alien in the strange humanoid spotted in a field? Until the very last moment, they will seem to us like just a very large dog or a bizarre, perhaps sick creature, nothing more. That's how our brain works, our defense mechanism. In the gray matter, thousands of complex processes take place every second aimed at keeping our familiar, comprehensible world whole and preventing it from shattering into millions of incomprehensible pieces. At the right moment, the brain helps us ignore something strange, or gives it a simple association, or even replaces one troubling memory with another, more acceptable one. The smallest inconsistency in this system, and you are on the brink of madness. Perhaps that night I crossed that line. Somehow I drifted again into philosophy. Writing was becoming increasingly difficult. My hand seemed to fill with lead, and the skin on the back of my hand, it looked hideous, as if it was taking on that same yellowish-gray tint. I must finish quickly, and my philosophical musings are probably of no use to you, whoever you are. In short, you now understand how I first encountered them 5 days ago on Tuesday. After that, everything went wrong, much worse and much faster. On Wednesday, I saw 7 of them. Yes, I began to count. 1. A respectable man of about 50, in an expensive business suit from Brooks Brothers with a briefcase, was sitting on a bench at the bus stop near my home in the morning, holding an iPad on his knees. His bald head was partially covered with something resembling a greenish mold, and the skin on his hands had a parchment-like appearance. People passed by, sitting next to him, waiting for the bus. Some quickened their steps or averted their eyes, but no one showed any overt terror or panic. As if they didn't notice his grotesque appearance. I, too, walked past him trying not to stare. Then there was a teenage girl with a backpack and headphones near a Starbucks kiosk. Their neck was oddly twisted and her eyes glassy. A little boy, about 7 years old with a bright SpongeBob backpack, standing by the entrance to an elementary school. His face was gray and his lips blue. An all-black woman on bus number 47, in which I eventually sat to reach work faster, She sat motionless, staring out the window, and emanated a barely perceptible, sickly sweet smell of decay. A homeless man who slept while sitting by the Walmart supermarket on the way. An elderly man in a tweed suit waiting in line at a bank during his lunch break. And an old gray-haired woman on the bench near my apartment when I was returning in the evening. Her jaw was unnaturally slack. I noticed a disturbing trend. They looked worse than those two I saw on Tuesday. The signs of decomposition on their skin were more obvious, their movements even more slowed and mechanical. Some were almost completely still, sitting or standing. I did not know, and could not know, the reason behind what was happening. My thoughts became muddled. I supposed it might be some unknown virus, or a prion disease, or a toxin that was rapidly spreading and turning the living into something akin to the dead, bypassing the moment of clinical death. Or perhaps they were dying, but their bodies continued to function at some basic level. All these zombies I encountered didn't seem to have just risen from the graves. They were dressed in ordinary clothes, found in ordinary places. Perhaps even they didn't fully understand what was happening to them. That they were no longer fully alive in every sense of the word. On Thursday, I still went to work, trying to convince myself that it was all just a mass psychosis or that I was simply exhausted and needed rest. But after lunch, I couldn't take it any longer. The incident involved Sarah, the buffet lady, a kind woman of about 50 who always smiled and knew all the engineers by name. While I was standing in line for my lunch, her lower lip, which looked strangely swollen and dark, simply fell off. It detached and thudded directly into the soup bowl of the young man standing in front of me. A quiet, plopping sound. Sarah seemed not to notice it at all. She continued to serve mashed potatoes to the next person in line, and in place of her lip was a black void that exposed teeth. The young man in front of me froze for a moment, then silently pushed his bowl away and left. I too abruptly left the line and, without a word, went to the exit of the cafeteria and then out of the plant. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed that other people in the cafeteria continued eating, talking, laughing, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Only a few people looked at Sarah with surprise or disgust, but no one screamed or called for help. I called my boss and said I felt sick, like I had the flu, and took sick leave for the rest of the week. Now they were everywhere. It felt as if I saw them at every turn. Cashiers at the Target supermarket, monotonously scanning items with glassy eyes. Young mothers with strollers in Winston Park, where I had gone for a walk to gather my thoughts. One of them had a huge, festering wound on her cheek that she didn't even try to cover. Road workers in orange vests slowly repairing the asphalt on my street. By my rough estimates, they constituted about 15, maybe 20% of the ordinary, normal people. But the most terrifying thing was that normal people seemed not to react to these ghastly beings. Or they pretended not to notice. And what exactly was one supposed to do? After all, these corpses behaved mostly calmly, non-aggressively, with the exception of that woman in the park, though perhaps that was an isolated case. They merely existed among us like some horrifying backdrop. Someone had to make the first move, to begin taking action, but who? To rush out into the street with a hunting shotgun, which I do not have, and start shooting everyone who looks suspicious? And what if that didn't stop them? What if it provoked their aggression? What if the virus, or whatever it was, began spreading even faster? It seemed better to sit quietly, wait, and perhaps the government was already aware of the problem and taking secret measures. Likely they were, but they told us nothing, so as to avoid mass panic. Yes, that seemed like a logical explanation. I now regularly turned on the television, channel surfing for any hint of news, a clue, any explanation. But CNN relentlessly talked about upcoming elections and events in the Middle East. Fox News flattered immigrants and extolled the president's latest speech. NBC advertised a new Netflix series and discussed the lives of celebrities. Not a single mention of walking corpses, a strange epidemic, or mysterious deaths. No hint of anything unusual in Chicago or anywhere else. As if everything were entirely normal. I tried Googling phrases like living corpses Chicago, people rotting alive, The Walking Dead reality, strange skin disease, but the search engine obstinately produced only links to horror movies, TV shows, video games, and old articles about rare medical syndromes. On forums and social media, the silence was complete. No panicky posts, no photographs or videos. Was I the only one who saw all this? Am I going insane? But the fact was, people on the streets were clearly avoiding them, averting their eyes, pinching their noses. Or was that just my perception? On Friday, I didn't leave home at all. I barricaded myself inside my apartment. The mere thought of seeing them again, to feel their stench and to pretend nothing was amiss, was unbearable. I found work to report that my flu was dragging on. I listened to Jennifer from HR on the phone. Her voice sounded strangely slow, with bubbling undertones. Imagining her face, I couldn't take it and simply hung up. I spent the entire day in my chair, almost in a stupor, mechanically flipping through TV channels in vain hope of hearing some news, some explanation. But nothing significant came through. The world outside continued on with its ordinary life, ignoring the horror spreading through its streets. Late in the evening, just as I was about to fall asleep in my chair beneath the murmur of the television, a jolt like an electric shock hit me. A sudden, terrible thought pierced my foggy mind. Amanda. Oh, God, Amanda. My sister. I snapped awake as if scalded. How could I have forgotten about her? She lives here in Chicago, goes to college, parties, rides the subway. She is right in the center of this nightmare. I frantically grabbed the phone and, with trembling fingers, dialed her number. The ringing went on for what felt like an eternity, but she never answered. Again and again. Of course, it was Friday night. She was probably in some club with friends or on a date with her new boyfriend, Josh. The music was loud. She wouldn't have heard the call. Could it be that she noticed nothing? Didn't see them? And what if something happened to her? If one of those creatures attacked her? Scratched her? Or worse? I called her incessantly, probably 50 times, until finally, close to midnight, she returned my call. Mike, oh my God, what happened? Her voice sounded a bit irritated over the phone, but, thank God, completely normal, clear and crisp. I was at Blue Jazz with Josh. My heart nearly jumped out when I saw 50 missed calls from you. You really scared me. Are you okay? I exhaled with enormous relief. Elise. Telsey. Her voice was still her voice. I tried to speak calmly, cautiously asking if she was all right, if she had noticed anything strange or unusual recently on the streets or at college. Amanda was silent for a moment, and then laughed. Strange? No, nothing, except the new ghastly purple suit Ardene's wearing. Oh. Mike, are you sure you're all right? You sound kind of odd. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth over the phone. She would simply not believe it. She'd think I'd lost my mind. So I lied, saying that I had indeed caught a severe flu, had a high fever, and was probably hallucinating a bit. I asked her to come over the next day, Saturday, with some medicine from the pharmacy, maybe some soup. She hesitated slightly, recalling some plans with Josh, but then agreed to drop by after lunch. I simply had to see her in person, to make sure with my own eyes that she was all right and to try to warn her, to tell her about the terrible danger that, for some reason, she stubbornly refused to see. After all, who among us really sees beyond our own noses until we come face to face with it? Today was Shatown. Saturday. I had been waiting for her since early morning, nervously pacing the apartment, peering out the window. Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. I rushed over, looked through the peephole. Amanda. There she stood, smiling, holding a paper bag with the Walgreens logo. With trembling hands I unlocked and opened the door for her. And in that instant, my heart didn't just sink, it shattered into a million icy fragments. There she was, my dear sister Amanda, standing on the threshold, my own blood, my beloved sister, in her new, short, bright purple haircut, in her favorite ripped Levi's jeans and an old band t-shirt. And she was dead. Her face. It was ashen yellow, like that boy on Main Street. Her once bright, lively blue eyes had become nearly milky white, cloudy, devoid of expression. The skin around her eyes was darkened, with bluish circles. On her neck were the same repulsive lilac cadaverous stains. And her lips, they were swollen, cracked, and had a dark blue tint. A small silver piercing in the corner of her lip was surrounded by something resembling greenish mold. The most horrifying part was that she herself seemed completely unaware of it. She smiled with that dead smile, baring teeth that appeared too white against her blue lips. "Hi, big brother," she chirped in her new, slightly husky voice. "I brought you medicine for your terrible flu. Wow, you really do look a mess." She hugged me with one arm, and once again I was hit by that repulsive, sickly sweet, corpse-like stench that I had smelled in the park. She squeezed past me into the apartment, waving the Walgreens bag, and went straight into the living room, cheerfully chattering about Josh, about the party last night, about plans for the evening. I stood in the hall for a few minutes, trying to come to my senses, to process what I had just seen. I could hear her light-hearted banter coming from the living room. Her voice remained almost the same, recognizable, but now there were strange husky, croaking notes in her higher tones. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control, and slowly walked into the room. And everything that happened next I remember as if in a thick, nightmarish haze, fragmented. In flashes. I remember her cloudy, milky eyes, staring at me in total bewilderment. I remember her right ear. It looked as if it were half-rotted, dark, and at one moment, her favorite silver star-shaped earring simply fell from it, leaving behind a small bloody gash on her earlobe. She didn't even notice. I remember how I began shouting at her. Something about how she was dead, that she was infected, that she needed to leave. I remember how her face contorted, not from sickness, but from anger and incomprehension. She too started screaming back, saying that I was hallucinating, that I had gone mad with grief after Mom's death. She died in a car accident 3 years ago, and I had a hard time coping, that I urgently needed to see a psychiatrist, that she was about to call the doctors. Maybe I really should have listened to her then. Perhaps I should have tried to retreat into the world of illusions, close my eyes to the dreadful reality, as everyone else did. But I couldn't. I couldn't ignore what I saw right before me. Her split, cracked blue lips, the piercing, circled with mold, her empty, cloudy eyes, her torn ear and her sharply protruding, unnaturally elongated nose, resembling a beak. I remember, in my despair, running into the kitchen, trying to escape that nightmare. She lunged after me, still shouting about doctors and psychiatry. I noticed on the kitchen table a heavy metal meat mallet that I had forgotten to put away after dinner last night. I don't know what came over me. Panic? Fear? A desire to end her suffering? Or simply the urge to make her stop screaming? I grabbed that mallet and I struck. Once. Twice. A third time. She fell to the floor. Blood was everywhere. Now it is time to end this record. The scratch on my hand that the creature in the park gave me on Tuesday had done its work. An infection, virus, or whatever it was, spread throughout my body. A few minutes ago, I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw the color of my face changing rapidly. It was turning the same yellow-gray as theirs. My fingers were almost completely desiccated and yellowed. The skin on them was cracking. Writing is becoming ever more difficult. The letters blur. I found some old sleeping pills in the first aid kit, the same ones that a psychiatrist once prescribed for my mother shortly before her death. They're potent. Their expiration date had been years past, about 5 years ago, but now that didn't matter at all. If anything, it was even better, more reliable. Besides, there were plenty of them here, a whole pack. I left the apartment door open. I am writing this now in the kitchen, sitting at the table so that I can always see Amanda lying on the floor. I still get the feeling that sometimes she twitches, moves ever so slightly, but I'm not sure. Her head had turned into a ghastly bloody mess after my blows with the mallet, so it's unlikely she can now get up and leave. A zombie is alive as long as there's a functioning brain. Wasn't that what they showed in the movies? I hope that's true. I ask you once again for one thing. If you come here and suddenly I get up and stagger toward you, not knowing whether to stop, don't hesitate. The little hammer lies here on the table, next to this notebook. Do it. Stop me. I am no hero who will save the world from a zombie apocalypse. I was never a hero. I'm just one among thousands, maybe even millions of sufferers who will soon stagger through the streets of our cities, searching for the only thing that can sustain their decaying existence, the proteins contained in the brains of the living. It's time. I take the pills. A handful. I swallow them, washing them down with the remains of last night's whiskey. I swallowed. It was bitter. For now, I don't feel anything unusual, only a slight dizziness. But I notice how quickly my legs are growing cold. My vision slightly blurs. Writing is very hard. My hand barely obeys me. The letters dance before my eyes. I glanced at a small wall mirror hanging opposite the table. How strange. The pills must be starting to work, inducing other kinds of hallucinations. Because in the mirror I look normal. Yes, very pale, with dark circles beneath my eyes, but normal. Not yellow. Not gray. And Amanda's leg, it lies still, a normal young girl's leg in jeans, showing no signs of the ghastly decay I had described. I know, it's definitely the pills. The brain is beginning to fail, the gray matter is dying, distorting reality one last time. But no, wait. Something is not right. Something is fundamentally wrong. I extend my hand, look at it closely under the lamp's light. There is no trace of yellow. The scratch near my thumb is marked, but the skin itself is pale, yet normal. Normal, living skin. I bring it close to my face, touch my cheek, still the same pale, but living skin. No cadaverous stains, no yellowing as I wrote about just a minute ago. Only a deadly pallor. My eyes then fall on Amanda. On her leg and her ripped jeans. It is normal. Just a normal young girl's leg. Levi's jeans, a white sneaker. No signs of decay or decomposition as I had thought. The horrifying injury on her head, yes, that was my doing, my mallet. But she wasn't, she was not. Hallucinations. Could it be the pills are now dispersing them? Or were they there from the very beginning? That boy on Main Street, the woman in the park, the scratch that was merely a scratch. Sarah with her missing lip, maybe she just needed a dentist. All those people. Could it be that it was all just in my head? Stress. Grief for mom that won't let go. Exhaustion. Paranoia. Oh, God. Amanda. I killed my own sister. My little sister. She came to help me because she thought I was sick. She was worried about me, and I saw a monster where there was none. I beat her to death with the mallet, screaming, because my sick eyes saw not my dear little girl but a rotting, decomposing corpse. My fingers no longer obey. A heavy numbness spreads throughout my body. A chill creeps up to my heart. This is the end. But now I know the truth. The most terrible, horrible truth of all. I did not fall victim to a zombie virus. I became a victim of my own madness. And in doing so, I dragged with me into hell the only person I truly loved. Forgive me, Amanda. Forgive me. My hand falls powerless onto the table. The pen slips from my weakened fingers, leaving a long, awkward scratch on the final page of this notebook, like the trace of a tear. Ghosts of the Old Harbor, the price of fear. Moonlight barely pierced through the thick layer of harbor fog, illuminating the rusty sides of the giant cargo ship, Sea Star, permanently moored in the abandoned part of the harbor. A ghost ship, as the locals called it. For years it stood here, overgrown with rust and eerie legends about missing dockworkers and strange lights on the deck at night. It was these legends that brought Ray and Ginny here. Ray, with his thirst for adventure and a camera around his neck, saw the Sea Star as the perfect subject for his urban legend research. Ginny, madly in love with Ray but much more cautious by nature, followed him more out of love than her own desire. She held his hand tightly, her fingers cold despite the warm night. Ray, maybe we shouldn't, she whispered as they climbed over the rusty chain blocking access to the gangway. I have a bad ceiling. This place, it's oppressive. Ginny, darling, don't be afraid. Ray hugged her, his voice sounding cheerful, but a shadow of anxiety flickered in his eyes too. It's just an old shit. A little rust, a few cobwebs. We'll take a couple of cool photos, prove all these tales are nonsense, and go get hot chocolate. You know I'm always here. They climbed onto the deck. The silence was eerie, broken only by the creak of metal under their feet and the distant cry of seagulls. The deck was littered with some junk, old ropes, fragments of crates. It smelled of rust, salt, and something else vaguely unpleasant, sweetish, like the smell of old, stagnant water. Look how atmospheric. Ray had already taken out his camera, excitedly clicking the shutter. This will be my best report. Ginny looked around nervously. It seemed to her that from the dark corners of the deck, from the black voids of the holds and portholes, invisible eyes were watching them. A cold wind that suddenly blew from the sea made her wrap her jacket tighter. Ray, I think someone's here, she whispered, clinging to his elbow. You're imagining things, darling. It's just the wind blowing through the old compartments, Ray tried to reassure her, but he himself involuntarily listened. And then they heard it. A quiet, barely audible whisper, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere. Indistinguishable words, like a moan or a plea. And then, a quiet, slow scraping of metal on metal, approaching from the darkness of the corridor leading into the decks of the ship. What's that? Ginny turned pale, her eyes widening in horror. I don't know, Ray lowered his camera, his face serious. Let's get out of here. Quickly. But it was too late. Something slowly crawled out of the dark corridor. It didn't walk, but crawled, clinging to the deck with long, bony hands. It was a shapeless mass, vaguely resembling a human figure, but distorted, matted, as if made of dirty, wet rags and rusty chains. It made a quiet, gurgling sound, and the same sweetish, cadaverous smell emanated from it, but now much stronger. Oh my God! Ginny screamed. Run! Ray shouted, pushing her forward, towards the side of the ship. They started running, but similar figures began to emerge from other dark corners of the deck. Some crawled, others swayed on thin, unnaturally bent legs. Their faces, if they could be called faces, were distorted by suffering and decay, their eyes burned with a dull, phosphorescent light. These were the ghosts of the Sea Star, the souls of those who had met their death here. Ray and Ginny ran towards the stern, where rows of cargo containers towered. The ghosts moved slowly but relentlessly, surrounding them. This way. Onto the container. Ray shouted, noticing one standing slightly apart. Out of fear, the girl, without thinking, deftly, almost like a cat, scrambled onto the slippery metal surface of the container. She reached out her hand to Ray, but he didn't make it. Ray took a step back to get a running start and jumped, grabbing the edge of the container. He began to pull himself up, muscles straining with effort. He had almost swung one leg up when he felt an icy touch on his ankle. One of the crawling creatures, having crept up unnoticed, grabbed him with its bony, slimy hand and began to pull him down with inhuman strength. Ray screamed in pain and surprise. He tried with all his might to pull his body up, digging his fingers into the edge of the container until his joints ached. He managed to get his elbows onto the cold metal. He saw Ginny's terrified face before him, her eyes wide with horror. Almost there, he gasped. But then other ghostly hands, cold and sticky, began to cling to his legs, his jacket, pulling him down, into the darkness teeming with these eerie creatures. His body was being stretched as if on a rack. The pain was unbearable. Ray was being pulled over. He felt his fingers slipping. He raised his head and looked at Ginny, all in tears, frozen in nightmarish panic above. Ginny. Help. Please, give me your hand. Ray cried desperately, reaching out his free hand to her. His fingers were inches from hers. She just looked at his outstretched hand, at his face, distorted by pain and pleading. Then her gaze slid down, to the horrific figures clinging to his legs, to their empty eye sockets and rotting mouths. And in her eyes reflected such animal terror, such paralyzing fear, that it overshadowed everything: love, promises, shared dreams. She slowly shook her head. "Sorry, Ray. I can't. I'm so scared," she screamed through her sobs. In the next moment, as if in a dream, she jumped off the other side of the container onto the deck and, without looking back, tears streaming down her face, ran away from the ship, away from him. Abandoned. Betrayed. Ray watched her go, unable to believe his eyes. "But we loved each other," was his last conscious thought. He had no more strength to hold on. His fingers loosened. With a triumphant, gurgling howl, dozens of mutilated ghosts pulled him down. Like hungry bees to honey, they grabbed his body, his hair, his clothes with their dead, cold hands, pulling him towards them, into their eerie darkness. The last thing Ginny heard, already running towards the saving shore, was the inhuman, desperate scream of her now former boyfriend, drowned out by the sinister laughter of the ghosts of the Sea Star. That scream would haunt her for the rest of her life. 2 months passed. 2 long months filled with nightmares, tears, and loneliness. Ginny lived as if in a fog. The image of Ray reaching out to her, his last look full of pain and bewilderment, stood before her eyes day and night. She left their shared rented apartment, moved in with her parents, but found no peace anywhere. She barely ate, lost weight, her face turned gray, and dark circles appeared under her eyes. But now it wasn't just the painful guilt and memories of that terrible night that scared her. Not just the thought of the ghosts on that abandoned ship. Her own condition scared her. Constant nausea, weakness, dizziness. From anxiety and fear, or perhaps something else, her stomach began to ache, and frequent, exhausting vomiting appeared. Finally, her mother persuaded her to see a doctor. After the examination and tests, the elderly, gray-haired doctor looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and surprise. "Ginny, my child," he said softly, "it seems your symptoms have a perfectly natural cause. You are pregnant. About 2 months alone." Pregnant. 2 months. The word stunned her. She sat on the couch, staring at the doctor with empty eyes. Ray's child. The fruit of their love, conceived shortly before that fatal night. Learning this, the girl could neither rejoice nor despair. She felt only a mixture of shock, shame, and some new, even deeper pain. She felt incredibly sick at heart. The child of the man she loved. The child of the man she betrayed and left to the mercy of ghosts. After the hospital, she didn't go home. She went to the cemetery. To Ray's grave. His parents buried him here, although the body was never found. Only an empty coffin and a granite slab with his name, his photograph, the same one where he smiled so happily at her, and the dates of his life, so tragically cut short. Ginny fell to her knees before the cold stone, ignoring the dirt and wet grass. Tears, bitter, burning tears of guilt and despair, finally broke through. She sobbed, pressing her forehead against the cold slab. "Ray. Ray, darling. What have I done? Forgive me. Please, forgive me if you can. I was such a coward. So weak. I should have helped you. Should have stayed. Should have died with you. Forgive, forgive." She knelt for a long time, whispering words of apology into the cold evening wind. And then, unconsciously, she placed her hand on her stomach. There, inside her, a new life was growing. A part of Ray. The only thing left of him. And this life was both her curse and, perhaps, her only chance for redemption. But how could she raise this child? How could she look it in the eye, knowing the price she paid to stay alive herself? Ginny stood up, feeling the heavy burden of the future upon her. Behind her remained the grave of her beloved, ahead, uncertainty, filled with shadows of the past and responsibility for the life she carried under her heart. A life whose father she had condemned to a horrific death. And the ghosts of the Sea Star were now not only on the abandoned ship, their cold shadows had settled in her soul forever. Shadow of the daughter. The sun stood at its zenith, flooding Cambridgeshire with its generous, almost summer-like warmth. The air was saturated with the aromas of late spring, birdsong, and the barely perceptible smell of river water from the can. In a week, exactly 7 short days, a celebration dinner was to be held in the old house of the Bricks family, which stood on the outskirts of a quiet town near Cambridge. The occasion was special, the 25th birthday of Molly, the only and endlessly beloved daughter of Mrs. Eleanor Brooks. A quarter of a century. Eleanor still couldn't believe that her little girl, her blonde miracle, was already so grown up. That's why today, despite the pre-holiday bustle, Eleanor Brooks had gone to Cambridge. She had long planned a special gift for Molly, something eternal, something as beautiful as her daughter herself. After much deliberation, she had chosen an exquisite diamond necklace, which she had noticed several months ago in the window of one of the oldest jewelry stores in the city. The trip was necessary. Such things aren't bought online. Molly, who had recently graduated from university and was now enjoying a small break before job hunting, stayed at home, promising her mother she would sort 2 old photo albums for the party. Eleanor Brooks adored her daughter. Molly wasn't just an only child. She was long awaited, prayed for. After several years of futile hopes and disappointments, after doctors had almost given up on her dream of motherhood, Molly appeared in her life like a ray of sunshine on a gloomy day. Eleanor's husband, Arthur, died of a heart attack when Molly was only 5, and since then, Eleanor's entire world revolved around her daughter. She poured all her love, all her tenderness into her, trying to be both mother and father and best friend to her. And it seemed she had succeeded. Molly grew up intelligent, kind, somewhat dreamy, resembling her father with her gray-blue eyes and her mother with her blonde hair and stubborn character. The day in Cambridge passed quickly. Eleanor found the same little shop, spoke at length with the elderly jeweler who still remembered her parents, and finally, she held the velvet box in her hands. The necklace was even more beautiful than she remembered, a thin platinum chain and a small diamond of pure water that played in the sun with all the colors of the rainbow. Expensive. But for Molly, she spared nothing. On the way back, Eleanor stopped at a pastry shop and bought Molly's favorite almond cake, just because. She imagined how happy her daughter would be, how her eyes would light up when she saw the gift. The sun was already setting, tinting the sky in warm peach and pink tones, as Eleanor was returning home. On the back seat of her modest but reliable Volvo, in an elegant festive package with a large silver bow, lay the diamond necklace, a symbol of her boundless love. She hummed a cheerful melody to herself, anticipating a cozy evening with her daughter over a cup of tea and cake. Just as she was approaching the beginning of her street, Elm Street, Eleanor felt an inexplicable anxiety. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance flashing blue-red lights were visible. Her heart constricted unpleasantly. She moved forward slowly, navigating around the parked cars of neighbors who had come out onto the street. And then she saw them, 2 large fire engines and an ambulance standing near her house. Driving another 10 meters, to the haze of smoke and tears that involuntarily welled up in her eyes, the woman realized with horror, her house was burning. Their home. Flames were already escaping from the windows of the 2nd floor, where Molly's room was. Not remembering herself, Eleanor jumped out of the car, not even turning off the engine. Her legs weakened, the world swam before her eyes. Molly. Where's Molly? This thought beat in her head like a bird in a cage. She rushed forward, through the crowd of onlookers and concerned neighbors, straight to the nearest ambulance doctor who stood beside the unfolded stretcher. What about my daughter? Where is she? Is she alive? Gasping, almost shouting, Eleanor grabbed the doctor by the sleeve of his white coat. The doctor, a tired middle-aged man with deep wrinkles around his eyes, looked at her with sympathy, but his voice was level and professionally detached. Calm down, ma'am. We can't say anything yet. Your daughter's body has not been found. Firefighters are still working inside. A mixture of confusion and irrational, mad hope crossed Eleanor's face. If the body hadn't been found, did that mean she could have escaped? Maybe Molly had gone out somewhere? To her friends? To the store? And simply wasn't home during the fire? Or Or she had burned to ashes, alive, in her room, trying to escape. This thought was so horrifying that Eleanor nearly fainted. She clutched the doctor's arm, seeking support. The poor mother's thoughts, which oscillated between desperate hope and black horror, were interrupted by the loud voice of a firefighter who had just run out of the smoke-filled doors of the house, tearing off his helmet. The girl's body was found on the second floor. In the bedroom, he shouted in a breathless voice to his colleagues, and then, noticing Eleanor and the doctor, added more quietly, looking away, "Looks like she tried to open the door, but suffocated from the smoke." Hope extinguished completely, leaving behind only an icy emptiness. Eleanor Brooks' world crumbled in a moment. The doctor carefully supported her by the elbow. "Mrs. Brooks, we're very sorry. You'll have to come with us to identify the body," he murmured in the same monotonous, sympathetically detached voice. Eleanor didn't hear his words. There was a piercing, ultrasonic hum in her ears that drowned out everything around. She silently freed her hand and, like a sleepwalker, trudged back to her car. Her thoughts were confused. Identification. Kermali. No, it couldn't be her. This was some terrible mistake. She sat behind the wheel, her hands trembling so badly that she could barely insert the key into the ignition. When a policeman approached and suggested she ride in the ambulance, she firmly refused. "I'll go in my car," she said firmly, surprised by her suddenly calm voice. "I'll need to get back somehow." The policeman looked at her with surprise but didn't argue. He probably decided she was in shock. He only asked her to follow the ambulance. The entire journey to the city morgue, located on the outskirts near the old cemetery, Eleanor spent as if in a fog. She mechanically drove the car, watching the red lights of the ambulance ahead. Thoughts swarmed in her head, each more terrifying than the last. She clung to any possibility, to any slight discrepancy. Maybe it wasn't her daughter. Maybe a friend really had come to visit Molly, Sarah, or Lucy. They sometimes came over without warning. Maybe one of them had decided to try on Molly's clothes. But why would she be in Molly's bedroom? And how to explain the height, the hair color? All assumptions shattered against harsh reality. No, most likely, it was her girl. Her Molly. Upon arriving at the morgue, a gloomy gray building with narrow windows, Eleanor had lost all hope. She was led inside, to a small waiting room with several rows of plastic chairs and faded posters on the walls. The walls were painted in a dull, oppressive dark green color that seemed to press on her from all sides, sucking out the remaining air and strength. She sat on a bench in the corner and froze, staring into emptiness. The cold smell of disinfectant and something else, subtly sweet, tickled her nostrils. It was incredibly difficult to breathe, difficult to think, difficult to simply exist. Until this moment, it seemed she had not fully realized what had happened, living in some numbness. And only here, in this eerie silence, the terrible reality began to slowly reach her consciousness, tearing her heart to pieces. Molly was gone. Her little girl was gone. Seemingly an eternity passed before the doors opposite opened and a young woman in a medical gown and mask peered out. "Mrs. Brooks? Please, come in," she said quietly. Eleanor rose on cotton legs and slowly entered the cool, brightly lit room. In the middle stood a metal table covered with a white sheet, under which the outlines of a human body were visible. The female pathologist gestured for her to come closer. "I'm very sorry," she whispered, carefully lifting the edge of the sheet. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her strength, and then forced herself to look. The sheet only slightly covered the fire-ravaged body of the girl, but then revealed the face. Or rather, what remained of it. Burned, black, distorted beyond recognition. One hand was stretched forward, fingers charred to the bones. Evidently, the poor girl had tried to open the door of her room to the last, to escape from the fiery trap. But it was this hand. Eleanor recognized the thin silver bracelet she had given Molly for Christmas. It had miraculously survived, though blackened by soot. Here, Eleanor was seized not just by fear, she was gripped by the icy horror of realization. This was her daughter. Her Molly. She forced herself to look further, searching for more confirmation, though her heart already knew the truth. In places on the charred head remained strands of blonde hair, the same as her own. And in the right ear, miraculously spared among the flames, shone a small gold earring in the shape of a star, the same one that she, a loving mother, had given Molly on her previous 24th birthday. Eleanor remembered how Molly had rejoiced, how she had promised never to take it off. And she hadn't. Then Eleanor noticed the girl's other hand, clenched in a fist. From the fist protruded a small charred red ribbon. An ordinary satin ribbon that Molly used as a bookmark for books. She always kept it handy. It was her. Without a doubt. Her child. Her lice. The poor woman could no longer look at this terrible sight. A dull moan escaped from her throat, turning into sobbing. She covered her face with her hands and, turning around, ran out in tears from this disgusting, death-soaked room. She ran down the corridor, then outside, paying no attention to the sympathetic glances of the staff and the quiet calls of the pathologist after her. Finally finding herself in the safe cocoon of her car, Eleanor Brooks helplessly collapsed onto the steering wheel and gave free rein to her tears. She sobbed for a long time, desperately, to complete exhaustion. Only now did she begin to truly realize the full scale of the tragedy. Her house had burned down, her nest, the place where the best years of her life had passed. But this was nothing compared to the other loss. She had lost the only person who truly needed her, the only person she herself needed, her daughter. Her reason for living. She could no longer bear it. Sitting here, near the morgue, was unbearable. She started the car and drove, not home, because there was no home anymore, but to her closest friend, Eleanor Vance, who lived in the neighboring town. Eleanor had been her support for many years, ever since Arthur's death. Perhaps she could somehow help her survive this nightmare. Exactly a week later, on the day Molly would have turned 25, the poor girl was buried in the old city cemetery, next to her father's grave. The day was gloomy, gray, a fine rain drizzled, as if the very sky was mourning the cut-short young life. They did not hold a memorial service. Eleanor didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to hear words of sympathy that seemed empty and false to her. There were only two people at the cemetery, Eleanor herself, dressed in black, emaciated and aged by 10 years in this week, and her faithful friend Eleanor, who silently held an umbrella over her. The poor woman was so unwilling to draw attention to the sudden, tragic death of her daughter that she even refused a lavish ceremony. A simple oak coffin, a small plaque with a name and dates. She knelt beside the fresh grave, covered with a few modest bouquets of flowers, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. My God. My daughter. My little girl. Why? For what is all this? What did I do to deserve this? What did she do to deserve it? She whispered through tears, peering into the dark earth that hid her treasure from her. She blamed herself for leaving that day, for leaving her alone, for failing to protect her. Eleanor, dear, calm down, please, Eleanor said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. You know, nothing can be changed now. You have to find the strength to go on somehow. For the sake of Molly's memory. But Eleanor seemed not to hear her. She continued to sob and blame herself, sinking into an abyss of grief and despair. The next day, Molly's birthday, passed like a terrible dream. Eleanor spent it in Eleanor's house, mostly lying in bed in the guest room and staring at the ceiling. She refused food, hardly spoke. It seemed her life had ended with her daughters. And the next morning, she was awakened by a persistent phone call. Her mobile, lying on the bedside table, vibrated and played a familiar melody. At first, she simply ignored it. Who could be calling her? And she had no desire to talk. But the phone wouldn't stop. The call ended, and a minute later it started again. And again. She even developed an involuntary interest, mixed with irritation. Who could be so persistent? Hesitantly, as if afraid, she approached the bedside table and took the phone in her hands. She looked at the screen to see who was calling. And froze. On the screen, the name brightly lit up, Molly. Eleanor cried out and dropped the phone back onto the bedside table, as if it had burned her. In the poor woman's head, a whirlwind of contradictory, insane thoughts raced. Terror. Shock. And again, a spark of mad hope. Could her daughter be Alice? Had she made a mistake during the identification? Could that charred body have belonged to someone else? But how? The earring, the bracelet, the ribbon. No, it was her. It couldn't be. After all, the poor girl's phone, it should have burned with her, along with everything in her room. The mother became completely confused. She sat on the edge of the bed, then moved to the couch in the corner of the room, tucking her seat under her, and began to stare unblinkingly, hypnotically at the phone, which was now silent again. Her heart was pounding so hard that it felt like it would jump out of her chest. After a couple of minutes, the phone rang again. The same melody. The same text on the screen, Molly. This time, the troubled Eleanor didn't throw the phone. She waited for the call to end, and then with trembling hands, through the tears that again poured from her eyes, grabbed the phone and found her daughter's number in the list of missed calls. She hesitated only for a moment, and then pressed the call button. Long, endless rings in the receiver drove the mother almost to madness. Each second of waiting stretched into eternity. Would no one answer? Was it just a network glitch, someone's mistake? And suddenly, the ringing stopped. On the other end, there was a quiet click, and then a voice. Quiet, familiar, but somehow strangely detached, like an echo. Hello? Hello? Keno? Molly? Daughter, is that you? Is it really you? Asked the troubled mother in a sobbing, frightened voice, not believing her own ears. Lon? Hello? The voice was calm, almost colorless, but it was the voice of her Molly. Yes, it's me. Everything's fine, Mom, calm down. Don't cry. What? Tell. Darling. My love. My child. Where are you? What's happening to you? Are you Alice? How is this possible? Answer me. Eleanor spoke very quickly, choking on words and tears, which also ceaselessly rolled down her cheeks. Mom, I'm at the cemetery now, the daughter replied with the same calmness. It's quiet here. You know, Mom, yesterday was my birthday. I wanted so much to spend it with you. Remember how we planned? Dinner, cake, our little ritual with candles. I remember. Of course, I remember, dear. Eleanor could barely speak. Wait, so you're alive? Tell. Mom, let's do without unnecessary questions now, okay? The daughter's voice acquired barely perceptible notes of impatience. Just come to me tomorrow. Here, to the cemetery. I'll be waiting for you near our place. Come. On my last birthday. We'll celebrate it together. Like we wanted. And before Eleanor could respond, ask, object, there were short beeps in the receiver. The connection was cut off. Eleanor sat motionless, clutching the phone that had fallen silent again. What was that? Mass hallucination? A cruel joke? Or was it really her Molly? From the other world? Thoughts frantically circled in her head. Part of her, the rational, adult part, screamed that it was impossible, that it was delirium caused by grief. But another part, the heart of a mother breaking from pain and love, desperately wanted to believe. Believed that her girl hadn't left her forever, that there was a way to be together. The next day, after a sleepless night filled with tears, prayers, and doubts, Eleanor Brooks made a decision. As Molly had asked, she went to the cemetery. She didn't know what to expect. Perhaps she would just sit by the grave, talk to her daughter, as many grieving parents do. She had nothing to lose anyway. And it was necessary to visit the grave in any case. It was a gloomy, windy day. Gray clouds hung low over the earth, threatening rain. The cemetery was almost empty. Eleanor found Molly's grave, sat down on the damp grass nearby, placed a small bouquet of white lilies, her daughter's favorite flowers. She sat there, immersed in her thoughts and memories, for about half an hour. She spoke quietly, telling Molly how much she loved her, how much she missed her. And suddenly she felt someone's gaze upon her. She raised her head and saw nearby, beside an old, sprawling oak, a dark figure. At first, she couldn't make out who it was, but then the figure slowly moved toward her. It was a girl, a young lady in a dark long dress. Her face was hidden in the shadow from the tree branches and by a hood. Eleanor became curious and a little anxious. What was this stranger doing near her daughter's grave? Perhaps a friend of Molly's that she didn't know about. Eleanor slowly rose and took a few steps toward the girl. The girl raised her head, coming out of the shadow. Shock pierced Eleanor like thousands of electric shocks. She froze in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. She looked at the stranger's face. Burned, black, distorted, the same face she had seen in the morgue. Only the eyes were alive, gray-blue, painfully familiar. The eyes of her Molly. No. Molly? Darling. W.H. Damn. Is it you? Molly. Eleanor exhaled, feeling the ground slipping from under her feet. The burned lips of the girl moved slightly, and the quiet, familiar voice sounded again, this time very close. Nom. Thank you for coming. I knew you would come. What's wrong with you? How is this possible? Stammered Eleanor, looking at the horrific face of her child. I'm dead, Mom. Don't you understand yet? Replied Molly in the same eerily calm, mournful voice. In her eyes, there was no pain, no fear, only some otherworldly sadness. But why do I see you then? Hear you? The mother asked in amazement, reaching out a hand to touch her, but not daring. Because you want to see me, Mom. Because your love is stronger than death, Molly quietly replied. Well, since you've come, let's go celebrate. After all, yesterday was my birthday. We promised each other. Come with me. Molly extended her charred hand to her. The poor woman had no choice. Or so she thought. Her mind screamed that this was madness, that it wasn't real, that she needed help. But her heart saw her daughter before her. Though in such a terrible form, it was her Molly. The only being on the entire planet who understood her without words. Her only comfort, her reason for living. And now what did she have left? The house had burned down. Her daughter had died. If she could still see the essence of her Molly, if there was even a ghostly chance to be near her, perhaps she should follow her? Wherever she might lead. Eleanor took a deep breath and, closing her eyes, hesitantly took the extended hand. Her daughter's fingers were cold as ice and dry as parchment. But it was her hand. Where are we going, dear? She asked quietly. Where we can be together, Mom. Always, replied Molly and led her away from the grave, toward the forest that began immediately beyond the cemetery fence. They walked for a long time, more than an hour, maybe two. They walked in silence, holding hands. Molly confidently led her mother through the dense thicket, along old, barely visible paths. The sun had long hidden behind clouds. It was getting dark. The forest was becoming thicker and gloomier. Eleanor was starting to run out of strength. She was breathless, her legs ached, the long hem of her black dress was frayed on branches and covered in tiny droplets of dirt and wet leaves. She didn't know where they were going, but blindly trusted her daughter. Finally, they came to a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The air here was particularly heavy and still. Molly stopped. Mom, wait for me here, please. Just don't go anywhere. I'll be back soon. Where are you going, dear? Don't leave me alone. Eleanor asked fearfully. Where you can't come with me yet, Molly quietly replied, her burned face barely visible in the twilight. You're still alive. So wait here. I'll arrange everything. Exhausted, Eleanor unquestioningly obeyed. She sank down onto the damp earth beside the trunk of an old pine tree, tucking her feet under her, and began to wait. Much time passed. It became completely dark and cold. The forest filled with night sounds, the cracking of branches, the rustling of leaves, the distant cry of a night bird. Eleanor trembled from cold and fear but didn't move from her spot. Her strength was leaving her. She wrapped herself in her thin dress, her eyes glued together. Finally, when she had almost lost consciousness from cold and exhaustion, a familiar silhouette appeared between the trees. But this time it was different. Bright. Molly approached her. Her face was no longer burned. It was as Eleanor remembered it, young, beautiful, illuminated by a soft internal light. She wore a snow-white light dress. She smiled her most familiar smile. "Mom, now we can be together. Sarave." "Come," she extended her hand to her, warm, alive. Eleanor looked at herself. Her black morning dress had also changed to snow-white and light. She felt an incredible lightness throughout her body. The cold and fatigue disappeared. She took her daughter's hand. They ran carefree through the forest, which now seemed not frightening but magical, bathed in moonlight. They laughed, as they once did in the past when Molly was little. Eleanor Brooks was happy. Finally, she was with her daughter. Forever. The next morning, a random mushroom picker who wandered deep into the forest found the stiff body of a woman in a black dress by an old pine tree. It was Eleanor Brooks. As doctors later determined, she had died from hypothermia. No one could understand what the respected Mrs. Brooks, who had recently experienced a terrible tragedy, was doing late at night alone in the forest, so far from the city. But the strangest thing, what shocked the police and everyone who knew this story, was something else. In the tightly clenched fist of the dead woman was clutched a small charred red ribbon. Exactly the same one that had been discovered a week ago in the hand of her dead daughter, Molly. No one wanted to believe in the supernatural. No one would want to believe in this story to the end. But the missed calls from the other world, from the contact, Molly, remained saved in the memory of the phone found in the pocket of the deceased Mrs. Brooks. As a silent, eerie testimony to love that proved stronger than death. Or madness that led to it,